It was a quiet evening in a suburban neighborhood. Chuck Norris, dressed in casual tactical gear, was walking his loyal dog, a medium-sized shepherd mix named Titan. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden hues over the streets. Chuck was enjoying the calm, tossing a small ball for Titan to fetch. The dog barked happily and ran back with the ball, tail wagging. 2 uniformed police officers were patrolling nearby. They had received a vague report about a suspicious man with a dog in the area. As they approached Chuck, they misread his calm, confident posture as a threat. Titan, unaware of the tension, barked at the approaching officers. Without waiting for clarification, one of the officers shouted, "Stay back." The dog, loyal and protective, barked again. The other officer, nervous and tense, drew his weapon. In a split second, shots were fired. Titan yelped and collapsed. Chuck froze for a moment, disbelief washing over him. His normally unshakable composure was tested. Bystanders began to gather, some recording on their phones. People gasped and shouted, trying to intervene, but Chuck held up his hand. He knelt beside Titan, gently cradling his dog. His face was calm, but his eyes, cold, calculating, spoke volumes. No one knew what this man was capable of. To them, he looked like an ordinary man in shock. To anyone who had ever served alongside him, the look in his eyes meant one thing: wrong move. He whispered softly, "It's okay, boy, stay calm." His voice was even, almost serene, but every syllable carried authority. The officers, noticing Chuck's calm demeanor, hesitated, unsure if they had provoked something they could handle. Chuck's wife, who had been walking a few steps behind him, gasped and called out, "Chuck." He raised a hand, signaling her to stay back. "I've got this," he said quietly. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready, but he did not act hastily. He would not let rage dictate him. The tension in the air was electric. The crowd sensed that this was no ordinary confrontation. A man had just lost his beloved companion to a reckless mistake, but there was something about Chuck Norris that made everyone around him instinctively step back. What Chuck did next left everyone standing there completely speechless. The crowd around the street corner had grown in minutes. People were whispering, some pointing their phones toward the scene. Everyone was tense, unsure of what to do. Chuck Norris knelt beside Titan, cradling his dog gently in his arms. The once playful shepherd was now motionless, and an eerie silence settled over the area. His normally calm presence radiated authority. Though grief and anger swirled within him, Chuck did not raise his voice, did not lunge at the officers. He remained unervingly composed. The 2 officers, still on edge, were attempting to justify their actions. "Sir, we thought your dog was aggressive," one stammered. The other added, "We received a call about a suspicious man with a dog, and we acted to protect ourselves." Chuck's eyes met theirs, calm, piercing, unwavering. He slowly stood, Titan still cradled in his arms, and said in a steady voice, "You acted without reason. My dog did nothing to harm you. And now, because of your mistake, he's gone." The crowd gasped, whispering to one another. Some dared to approach, others stayed frozen, watching. A few bold onlookers started recording on their phones, capturing every tense second. Chuck's voice remained even, almost serene, but there was a weight to it that made everyone instinctively step back. He was not threatening yet. He didn't need to. His presence alone demanded respect. If you were watching this happen live, where would you be commenting from? Type your country or city below. One of the officers shifted nervously. "Sir, Chuck interrupted, raising a hand in a measured gesture. "Do not speak to me like that. You need to understand that actions have consequences, and you acted recklessly. You do not get to decide when life ends, especially not my dog's." His calm, yet commanding tone silenced even the murmuring crowd. Some bystanders began whispering among themselves, glancing at Chuck curiously. "Who is he?" one asked. "I feel like he's military or something." The officers, meanwhile, began to grow defensive. "We were protecting ourselves." "You don't understand," one said, sweat forming on his brow. Chuck's eyes did not leave theirs. Every breath he took seemed deliberate, controlled. His posture was relaxed yet alert, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment. The street itself seemed to shrink around him. Chuck slowly set Titan down, gently closing his dog's eyes with a soft touch. He then took a step back, scanning the area. You called yourselves protectors, he said, his voice steady. Yet you destroyed the life of an innocent creature. Think about that. Reflect. A few people whispered to each other. There's something different about him, like he's seen combat. You don't see that kind of composure in ordinary people. The officers, noticing the growing crowd, seemed to shrink under the scrutiny. Phones were pointed at them now. Everyone was recording. They could feel the pressure mounting. Chuck's wife had approached cautiously, placing a hand on his arm. Chuck, maybe we should leave, she whispered. He shook his head, calmly. No, this needs to be handled. People need to see that this kind of behavior is unacceptable. The tension grew. Onlookers were shifting, holding their phones higher. Some began muttering. This is insane. He's not reacting like anyone else would. Children nearby clung to their parents, sensing the intensity but not understanding why. Chuck took a deep breath and looked directly at the lead officer. Look at me. You may have training, but do not mistake that for wisdom. Judgment without understanding is the path to disaster. The officer swallowed hard, his voice shaky. Yes, sir. We didn't know. Chuck didn't flinch. He let the words hang in the air. Every eye on the street seemed glued to him. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the officer's jittery, defensive demeanor. The crowd could sense it. This was not an ordinary man. They were witnessing someone extraordinary. Comment below what you would do if this happened to your pet. Would you stay calm like Chuck, or something else? Meanwhile, the energy of the crowd shifted. People started to whisper Chuck's name. Is that Chuck Norris? A few more murmurs spread through the gathering. No one wanted to be the first to confirm it, but the words floated in the air. The officers, however, remained unaware. They only saw a man, controlled, composed, and unflinching, but they had no idea of the lethal force hidden beneath that calm exterior. Chuck took one last measured step forward. I will not act in anger. I will not act rashly. But understand this. This world cannot continue if those entrusted to uphold the law act without discipline or respect. Every word he spoke was deliberate, every pause calculated. The crowd felt the gravity. People held their breath. Some began recording more aggressively, knowing they were witnessing a moment they would never forget. The officers were now visibly shaken. Their hands shook, their confidence slipping. Chuck didn't raise a fist or threaten anyone, but everyone present knew the danger he could unleash if he chose to. And in that silent, charged moment, it was clear, the man standing before them was no ordinary civilian. What Chuck does next will leave everyone, including the officers, completely stunned. The street was electric with tension. Bystanders had formed a loose circle around Chuck Norris and the two trembling officers. Phones were held high, capturing every second. The grief of losing Titan, the loyal dog that had been Chuck's constant companion, hung in the air like a storm cloud. But Chuck didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't lunge. Instead, he stood with a calm precision that made everyone, even the officers, instinctively step back. Sir, please. It was an accident, one officer stammered, his voice shaking as sweat dripped down his forehead. Chuck's eyes didn't leave theirs. Every muscle in his body was relaxed, yet ready, like a coiled spring. He exhaled slowly and spoke, his tone measured, carrying a weight that silenced even the murmuring crowd. Accident or not, he said quietly, you acted recklessly. You took a life without cause. That is not protection. That is destruction. And destruction without responsibility will always come back to those who wield it. The officers looked around, realizing the crowd was no longer supportive of them. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. He's calm. Too calm. Look at the way he's standing, like he's military. Isn't that Chuck Norris? A woman whispered to her friend. I feel like if he wanted, he could snap them in half, just like that. Everyone in the circle flinched, glancing nervously at Chuck. It was clear, even to casual observers, that the man standing before them was no ordinary civilian. There was history, discipline, and lethal experience etched into his posture. Chuck's wife gently tugged at his sleeve. Chuck, maybe we should leave before this escalates. He shook his head. No. Let them see the consequences of their actions. Let them learn the value of respect and restraint. One of the officers took a shaky step forward. Sir, Chuck raised a finger, not aggressively, but in a controlled gesture that commanded silence. Do not speak until you can speak with honesty. I will not allow excuses to mask wrongdoing. The crowd went silent. Children clung to their parents. The elderly looked on with concern, and teenagers instinctively raised their phones, recording history unfolding before their eyes. Chuck's presence alone had shifted the energy. The officers were no longer the ones in control. If you were here, what would you do? Would you stay calm like Chuck, or would you lose your temper? Type your answer in the comments. The officers' bravado began to crumble. One whispered to the other, Maybe we made a mistake." Chuck's eyes flicked toward them, sharp and unwavering. He didn't need to move to intimidate them. His reputation and aura were enough. A bystander stepped slightly closer, curiosity overtaking fear. "Sir, who are you?" Chuck's lips twitched in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He remained silent for a moment, letting the question hang. Then he spoke softly, with authority. "I am a man who has faced far worse than this. But I have also learned that control is stronger than violence. You, however, still have lessons to learn." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Whispers of recognition spread like wildfire. "It is Chuck Norris, the Delta Force legend. He's a soldier, a warrior." The officers, still unaware of who they were dealing with, were visibly shaken. One of them took another step back, dropping his gaze to the ground. Chuck, sensing the tension, did not advance. He didn't need to. His calm precision was a warning in itself. Every subtle shift in his posture conveyed lethal capability, honed over decades of training, combat, and discipline. Some onlookers tried to mediate. "Sir, maybe we should just call it a misunderstanding." Chuck's voice rose just slightly, not in anger, but in the commanding tone of a man who expects obedience. "A misunderstanding is only harmless if lessons are learned. Today, you learn that actions without accountability bring destruction, and that life, especially innocent life, must be respected." The officers now looked terrified, the adrenaline making their hands tremble. They had gone from controlling the situation to being utterly powerless under Chuck's unwavering presence. The crowd could feel it. Even those recording felt a shiver down their spines. Chuck glanced down at Titan, gently touching the dog's fur. Then he stood tall, surveying the officers with quiet authority. The crowd instinctively stepped back further, giving him space. It was clear. The man they were witnessing was no ordinary civilian, no ordinary fighter. He had the discipline of a Delta Force commander, the lethal precision of a warrior, and the calm restraint of someone who had seen more than most would ever face in a lifetime. The officers realized, too late, that they were not dealing with just another victim. They were dealing with a man capable of unimaginable force if pushed. Whispers start spreading through the crowd. Could this man really be who they think he is? The next moment will reveal just how extraordinary he truly is. The street remained tense, the air thick with disbelief and unease. Chuck Norris stood still, his posture calm but lethal, Titan lying quietly at his feet. The crowd that had gathered slowly began to murmur, whispers spreading from one onlooker to another like wildfire. "Is that Chuck Norris?" a teenager whispered, holding his phone up to record. "No way could it be," another voice replied. "I've seen him in documentaries, the martial artist, the soldier." Chuck didn't speak immediately. He simply observed the officers, who were now visibly shrinking under the weight of attention and scrutiny. Their earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a jittery awareness that they were in over their heads. Every movement Chuck made, every controlled breath, radiated authority. One middle-aged man, standing near a food cart, nudged his friend and whispered, "He's got that calm, that presence. You know he's been trained, right? Military, special forces." The other nodded, eyes wide. "Yeah, I heard he's part of Delta Force. You do not want to mess with someone like that." The murmurs only grew louder. Phones were raised higher, capturing the scene from every angle. Parents pulled their children slightly closer, sensing danger they didn't fully understand. But even the crowd's unease couldn't overshadow the growing awe. Chuck's composure, his calm precision, and the quiet authority he exuded were hypnotic. The lead officer, still unaware of the whispers, tried to reassert control. "Sir, please, this is getting out of hand." Chuck turned slowly toward him, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "Out of hand?" he asked quietly, each word deliberate, each syllable carrying the weight of command. "This is exactly how actions without accountability become dangerous. You chose violence without understanding. and now you face the consequences of your recklessness. The crowd shifted again. Whispers now carried names: Delta Force, legend, martial artist. Chuck's reputation began to precede him, though the officers remained oblivious. They saw a man calmly confronting them, but they didn't realize that this calm was not fear, it was lethal control. Every second he didn't lash out. Every step he refrained from violence, only heightened the tension. A young woman near the edge of the crowd whispered to her friend, "Do you think he's the Chuck Norris from all the movies and legends?" The friend swallowed hard. "If he is, oh man, those guys are screwed." Chuck's wife, still a few steps behind him, glanced nervously at the officers. "Chuck, maybe we should go before." He shook his head, a small, controlled movement. "No, let them witness this. Let them learn the value of restraint. Let them understand the difference between someone who acts recklessly and someone who acts responsibly, even when provoked." The officers, sweating now, exchanged uneasy glances. One muttered under his breath, "Why isn't he angry? He should be furious. Anyone else would have." Chuck's eyes flicked to them, sharp and precise. "Do not speak unless you are prepared to speak with honesty and humility," he said, his tone calm but commanding. The officers froze. The crowd began to realize that this was more than a confrontation. It was a masterclass in discipline, presence, and controlled power. One bystander finally whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "That's him. That's Chuck Norris, the most lethal Delta Force commander ever. This isn't just a guy. This is someone who has fought wars, survived battles, and he's standing here, calm." The murmurs spread like wildfire. People took a step back, giving Chuck more space instinctively. The officers were still in denial, still clinging to their authority, but the energy in the street had shifted completely. The power dynamic had flipped. Chuck bent slightly, gently placing a hand on Titan's still body. He didn't show rage, only quiet grief and measured strength. He turned slowly, scanning the officers once more, and spoke again. "You think power is in weapons. You think authority is in badges. True power, true authority, comes from discipline, restraint, and the ability to act decisively without anger." The crowd listened, captivated. Every phone recorded, every eye watched. The officers' hands trembled as they realized the man standing before them was someone they could not intimidate, someone whose reputation alone was enough to make them reconsider every choice they had made in the past few minutes. Some began whispering excitedly. He could take all of them down without even trying. And he's holding back. He's letting them live for now. The tension rose further as Chuck stood fully upright, Titan cradled gently for one last moment before he stepped back, letting the reality sink in. The whispers had become a chorus: respect, awe, fear, and disbelief all wrapped into one. The officers still don't know who they're dealing with. But Chuck is about to make them understand, in a way they will never forget. The crowd's murmurs had grown into a tense silence, the kind of silence that precedes something monumental. Chuck Norris stood tall, the weight of Titan's loss pressing on him, yet his composure remained flawless. Every eye in the crowd was fixed on him, every camera lens trained on the man who radiated authority without raising his voice. The lead officer, now visibly trembling, stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Sir, we..." Chuck held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. His eyes locked onto the officers, calm yet piercing, and he spoke slowly, deliberately, each word carrying the weight of experience and truth. "You think this is about law and order. You think authority comes from a badge or a gun. It doesn't. Authority comes from understanding. Respect comes from restraint. And power, real power, comes from knowing when to act and when to hold back." The officer swallowed hard, but the other stepped forward defiantly. "You think we did something wrong? You think you're better than us?" Chuck's gaze shifted toward him, unflinching. The calm in his voice now carried a subtle undertone, a warning, a presence that made every hair on the officer's neck stand on end. "I am not here to prove I am better," Chuck said. "I am here to show you the consequences of carelessness, of judgment without understanding. You acted recklessly. You ended a life, my dog's life, without cause. And yet, here I stand calm. Because strength is not in the strike, it is in the restraint." The crowd had gone completely silent. Even children stopped whispering to their parents, and teenagers lowered their phones for a moment, sensing the gravity of the moment. Every person watching felt the tension between controlled power and reckless authority. Chuck's stance shifted subtly, a tiny adjustment that only trained eyes would notice. There was coiled energy in every movement, a lethal calm, honed through decades of military training and Delta Force operations. To the untrained eye, he was just a calm man grieving his dog, but anyone who knew what to look for could see the predator beneath the serenity. "You think this is fear?" he continued, voice steady. "No, this is discipline. You think I need to act? I could make this situation end in an instant, and you would not even have time to blink. But I will not, because restraint is stronger than rage. Responsibility is stronger than impulsive authority. Today, you learn this lesson, or you will never be trusted to protect again." One officer's knees trembled visibly. "Yes, sir. We didn't know." Chuck's eyes didn't waver. Ignorance does not excuse destruction. Carelessness does not excuse violence. And you must learn that every action has consequences. If you cannot respect life, you do not deserve authority. A bystander whispered to another, barely audible. "Do you realize who he is?" The other whispered back, awed. "Delta Force, legend, lethal beyond imagination, and he's holding back. Just imagine what would happen if he didn't." The crowd collectively shivered at the thought. Even though Chuck had not made a single threatening movement, the weight of his presence alone was enough to humble everyone within a 50-foot radius. The officers realized they were no longer in control. They were facing a man whose life experience and lethal capability dwarfed their authority entirely. Chuck's voice softened slightly as he glanced down at Titan one last time. "You see this? Life is precious. Loyalty is sacred. Carelessness destroys both. Learn from this mistake, not just today, but every day you wear that badge. Learn to act with honor. Learn to act with restraint. That is true strength." The officers' faces were pale, sweat dripping down their brows. They were broken, not physically, but morally. They understood, perhaps too late, that they had provoked someone far beyond their comprehension. Chuck finally took a step back, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd. People whispered his name again, Chuck Norris. Delta Force, the most lethal man alive, and he just lectured those cops without raising a finger. Every phone continued to record, capturing the awe-inspiring scene for the world to witness. Chuck's calm, measured authority had turned what could have been a tragic confrontation into a lesson in discipline, morality, and restraint. The officers still don't fully realize who they've been confronting. But when Chuck's true identity is revealed, the crowd, and the cops, will finally understand the magnitude of their mistake and what it truly means to face a living legend. The tension on the street had reached a peak. Bystanders were holding their phones higher, whispering to each other in awe, but the two officers were still unaware of the man they had provoked. Sweat dripped from their brows, and their hands trembled as they fumbled with their belts, desperately trying to maintain authority. Every second felt heavier, every glance from Chuck Norris like the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressing down on them. Chuck's calm demeanor had never wavered. He knelt for a moment beside Titan, closing the dog's eyes gently, then rose slowly. The movement was deliberate, controlled, every ounce of his body radiating the lethal experience of someone who had faced combat situations far more dangerous than this. A uniformed officer arrived on the scene, responding to reports of gunfire. He took one look at Chuck and the trembling cops. "Whoa, that's him, isn't it?" he whispered under his breath. The crowd leaned in, straining to hear. Someone finally said it aloud. "Wait, that's Chuck Norris, the Delta Force commander, the legend." Instantly, the street seemed to shift. The whispers grew into an audible hum of astonishment. Phones captured every reaction, gasps, wide eyes, dropped jaws. Even those who hadn't recognized him before now understood the gravity of the situation. The two original officers froze completely, their faces drained of color as realization hit. The man they had just shot the dog of, the man they had threatened with reckless authority, was not just anyone. He was Chuck Norris, a warrior, a soldier, a Delta Force commander with decades of lethal experience. The sheer weight of his reputation, combined with the calm authority radiating from him, was enough to make even the bravest of men reconsider every decision they had made in the last few minutes. Chuck stepped forward, his gaze steady, but his aura now undeniable. "Do you understand yet?" he asked, his voice calm, measured, but carrying the authority of someone who could, and had, ended far worse situations in seconds. The lead officer stammered. We didn't know. We had no idea who you were. Chuck's eyes narrowed slightly, but he remained composed. You didn't know, and now you do. And yet, that does not absolve you. You acted recklessly, without respect, without thought for life, my dog, or any life you may encounter. Your badges do not grant you the right to destroy. The crowd erupted in quiet awe. Phones zoomed in, capturing Chuck's every word, his every movement. Children clutched their parents' hands, teenagers whispered in shock, and adults felt a mixture of relief, admiration, and fear. One bystander stepped forward, awestruck. Sir, you could have taken them down in an instant. Chuck nodded subtly, a faint, controlled smile tugging at his lips. Yes, I could have, but that is not what true strength is. True strength is restraint. True power is control. And those who are entrusted to protect must first understand discipline before authority. The two officers now stood frozen, shame and fear written across their faces. Their attempts at authority had crumbled in the presence of someone who had faced far worse threats, yet never lost control. The crowd sensed it. Every subtle movement, every calm glance from Chuck radiated lethal competence and moral authority simultaneously. If this happened to you, your dog attacked or killed by someone careless, how would you react? Comment below. Would you stay calm like Chuck, or something else? Chuck bent down one final time, placing a gentle hand on Titan. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't display rage. He simply honored the life lost, sending a silent message to the officers and the crowd. Strength without discipline is meaningless. Turning to the officers, he continued, You will report this incident. You will take responsibility. And you will learn that authority without respect is not protection, it is destruction. You may never understand fully what you provoked today, but remember this. Never underestimate the calm presence of someone who is trained for a lifetime to face what most cannot even imagine. The officers nodded weakly, finally grasping the enormity of their mistake. Their arrogance had been shattered, their confidence replaced with humility and fear. They realized that the man standing before them was not only capable of destroying them physically, but morally and psychologically. And he chose restraint. The crowd erupted into applause and whispers of respect. People filmed, shared, and marveled at the scene. Chuck Norris had turned what could have been a tragic confrontation into a lesson in discipline, authority, and morality. The story would travel far beyond this street corner. Chuck stood upright, Titan gently laid to rest, and surveyed the street one last time. The officers remained humbled, the crowd mesmerized, and the atmosphere charged with awe. The man who had been underestimated, grieving yet calm, powerful yet restrained, had commanded respect without lifting a hand. The world is about to witness this incident go viral. Chuck's lesson on restraint, justice, and respect will reach millions, and the officers will face consequences they will never forget. By the time Chuck Norris left the street that day, the footage of the confrontation had already begun spreading online. Bystanders uploaded their videos to social media, capturing every second. The calm authority in Chuck's gaze, the trembling officers, the quiet respect he showed even after his loyal dog, Titan, was killed. Within hours, the story went viral. News outlets picked it up. Headlines flashed across screens worldwide. Delta Force legend Chuck Norris confronts reckless officers after dog killed. Chuck Norris teaches lesson in restraint and respect after tragic incident. Viral video shows legendary commander holding officers accountable without violence. Millions watched the videos, replayed the moments, and marveled at Chuck's composure. Comments flooded in from all corners of the globe. This is what real strength looks like. I would have lost control. Chuck is a legend. Respect isn't given. It's commanded through discipline. The officers faced immediate consequences. Internal investigations were launched, disciplinary actions were taken, and public outcry ensured that accountability would not be avoided. The reckless behavior that had sparked the incident was exposed, and their authority was publicly questioned. They had underestimated a man whose experience, skill, and moral compass far surpassed theirs, and the world now knew it. Meanwhile, Chuck's response became a symbol. It wasn't about rage or revenge. It was about restraint, responsibility, and integrity. He gave interviews to news outlets, speaking calmly about the importance of respecting life, the need for accountability in positions of power, and the difference between authority and true strength. In every situation, he said, the choice to act with discipline is stronger than the choice to act with anger. Power without wisdom is dangerous. Today, my dog's life was lost because of recklessness, but lessons can be learned. That is what we must focus on. Across social media, hashtags began trending. Hashtag respect life. Hashtag discipline over rage. Hashtag Chuck Norris lesson. Users from every country shared their thoughts, inspired by the story of a man who had been provoked yet chose a path of calm, moral authority rather than immediate retaliation. People discussed how they could apply these lessons in their own lives, at work, in their communities, and in conflicts they faced. The story became more than just a viral moment. It became a movement. Schools discussed it in ethics classes, law enforcement agencies used it as a case study in accountability, and self-defense communities dissected Chuck's restraint and measured authority. He had taken a deeply personal tragedy, the loss of Titan, and transformed it into a global lesson in dignity, restraint, and respect. Back on the street where it all began, the crowd's footage served as a reminder. One man, calm yet lethal, had confronted authority, demanded justice, and showed the world that true strength is measured not by the power to destroy, but by the wisdom to control it. If you believe no one should be judged or disrespected, type respect in the comments below. Share this story to remind the world that true strength is restraint, and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. Even days later, the echoes of that confrontation were felt everywhere. Chuck Norris didn't just stand up for his dog. He stood up for accountability, morality, and the principle that actions have consequences. And in doing so, he reminded the world that legends are not made solely by physical prowess. They are defined by courage, integrity, and unwavering discipline. The story, captured by ordinary bystanders and shared across continents, had reached millions, teaching a timeless lesson. True strength is silent, measured, and always grounded in respect.